Donald Trump walks into a border outpost. What he does next leaves everyone stunned. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day. Soldiers patrolled under the scorching sun, their eyes heavy with exhaustion, having grown used to being forgotten, with no words of encouragement and no one truly noticing them. But then something happened that no one expected. A helicopter descended, kicking up a cloud of dust. No banners, no media crews. Only one man stepped out, his stride purposeful. It was Donald Trump. No announcement, no grand ceremony, and the first words he spoke were not a rehearsed speech, but a simple, unexpected question. "Can someone tell me how your day has been?" No one knew that in that moment, everything was about to change. The atmosphere inside the White House Situation Room was heavier than ever. The glow of massive screens reflected off the faces of high-ranking officials, and stacks of thick reports filled with numbers, charts, and classified briefings covered the table. President Donald Trump sat at the center, his sharp gaze scanning the pages in front of him. He wasn't one for lengthy reports, but today something demanded his full attention. Around him sat top military generals, national security advisors, and key officials from the Pentagon. Standing nearby was John Matthews, the Secretary of Defense, a seasoned man with silver-streaked hair and a gaze that had seen years of battle and bureaucracy. "Let me know if you'd like any adjustments to enhance the emotional impact or engagement further," Matthews said as he cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "Mr. President, this is the latest report on border security. We've deployed military forces to assist Customs and Border Protection, but—" He hesitated, glancing at the officials around the table. "We're facing some serious problems." Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "Be specific," he demanded. Another voice cut in. "General Robert Keller, the commander of the Border Task Force. Sir, illegal crossings remain a challenge, but the bigger issue is morale. These men have been stationed at the border for months, enduring extreme conditions, yet they feel forgotten. Internal reports indicate rising frustration. They lack resources, recognition, and most importantly, they don't know if their sacrifices even matter." Trump clenched his fists on the table, his jaw tightening. He hated cold statistics. He wanted to hear about people, about real stories that the media wasn't talking about. "This," he said in a low but firm voice, "all I see are articles about policy and budgets. But no one is telling me that our soldiers out there feel abandoned." Matthews nodded grimly. "Sir, we've proposed improvements, but bureaucratic processes are slow. It could take months, even years before we see real change." Trump sat in silence for a moment, then suddenly tossed the report aside, his eyes resolute. "I don't have time for another report. I want to see for myself what's happening." The room fell so silent that the ticking of the clock on the wall became deafening. After a brief hesitation, General Keller spoke. "Sir, are you saying you want to go to the border yourself?" Trump stood up, his gaze unwavering. "Exactly. Get the plane ready. I want to meet our soldiers today." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. A border visit was not on the schedule. That meant no media coverage, no formal welcome, no prepared talking points, just a president determined to face reality firsthand. Matthews furrowed his brow. "Sir, a trip like this comes with risks. The border isn't exactly safe, and without advanced planning, we can't guarantee—" Trump raised his hand, cutting him off. "John, I'm not asking for a press conference or a photo op. I'm asking for the truth. If I can't stand among my soldiers, listen to them, and see what they go through, then I have no business sitting in this chair." Silence hung in the air for several seconds. Then Matthews exhaled sharply. "Understood, Mr. President. We'll make the arrangements immediately." Trump nodded. "Good. We leave in an hour." With that, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving behind a stunned group of officials. No one had expected the president to bypass all formalities and go straight to the front lines, but they all knew one thing for certain. When Donald Trump made up his mind, nothing could stop him. And so a historic journey began, an unplanned trip that would change everything. The helicopter trembled slightly as it sped southward, cutting through the vast blue Texas sky. Below, endless stretches of rugged mountains sprawled across the land, broken only by dusty roads leading toward the Mexican border. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The tension was thick, stretched tight, like a wire on the verge of snapping. President Trump sat by the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the landscape beneath him. He had seen the border before, but this time it was different. It was no longer just images on a briefing screen or numbers in a report. This was reality, a reality he needed to witness with his own eyes. Across from him, John Matthews studied him in silence. He knew Trump was not a man who wavered. Once he made up his mind, there was no stopping him. Yet even so, Matthews couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. "Sir," Matthews finally spoke in a measured tone, "the outpost we're heading to isn't like a standard military base. It's isolated, barely known, and the conditions are brutal. There's no major airstrip, no luxury accommodations, just soldiers holding the line against a relentless tide of threats." Trump didn't take his eyes off the window. "Then it sounds like I'm going to exactly the right place," he remarked. Matthews exhaled, knowing there was no talking Trump out of this. He turned to General Keller, who was reviewing the security protocols. Keller had served in the military for over 30 years, fighting in major conflicts around the world. Even he knew this was a different kind of battle, a battle with no explosions, no sirens, only silence, exhaustion, and a war against being forgotten. "We'll be landing in 15 minutes, Keller announced. "Security has been secured, but there are still risks. Smuggling cartels operate in this area, and they don't hesitate to provoke patrol forces." Trump nodded, his expression unwavering. "I'm not here to be protected. I'm here to see the truth." Those words left Matthews and Keller silent. They had met many presidents, many politicians, but this was the first time they had seen a leader willing to leave the comfort of the Situation Room and step directly into the harsh reality of the front lines, without cameras, without ceremony, without a script. As the helicopter descended, the landscape below came into sharp focus. A military outpost appeared, standing alone in the vast wilderness, with makeshift buildings, razor-wire fences, and watchtowers hastily erected. This wasn't a high-tech command center like the Pentagon, nor was it a well-established base. This was the front line, where soldiers endured hardship daily, unseen and uncelebrated. The helicopter touched down. A thick cloud of dust billowed into the air, clinging to uniforms and goggles worn by the waiting troops. But no one moved, no applause, no lined-up salutes. Only cautious eyes, sun-weathered faces, and the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. Trump stepped out first. He scanned the surroundings, taking everything in. The soldiers didn't rush to shake his hand or chant his name. They simply stood there, watching him, as if waiting to see whether he truly understood them, or if this was just another routine visit from a politician who would soon forget them. A tall officer stepped forward. Captain Mark Reynolds, the outpost commander, was a man built from years of service. His frame was solid, his face weathered with lines etched by time and duty, and his gaze was sharp, yet beneath it lay something else. Doubt. "Sir, welcome to Black Ridge Outpost," Reynolds said, his voice steady and firm. Trump nodded. "Thank you, Captain, but I didn't come here to be welcomed. I came to hear what's really happening." Reynolds glanced at his fellow soldiers before turning back to Trump. Then I hope you're ready, sir, because what we're about to tell you isn't in any report. Trump met Reynolds' gaze head-on, unwavering. "All right," he said in a low but firm voice. "I didn't come here to give a speech. I came to hear your stories. Tell me, what's really happening here?" At first, no one answered. Their eyes darted toward one another hesitantly. Finally, a young soldier with short black hair set his fork down on his tray, took a deep breath, and met Trump's gaze. "My name is Jake Miller, sir," he said, his voice dry, as if he had been holding back these words for too long. "I've been here 18 months, and I don't know if I can keep doing this." The room fell into a heavy silence. Jake clenched his fists as if wrestling with whether he should continue. Then his voice steadied. "When I first came here, I felt proud. I wanted to serve my country, to do something that mattered. But as the days dragged on, I started feeling like I was nothing more than a ghost. We're out here, working day and night, facing dangers no one talks about. I've watched my brothers get wounded in firefights with smugglers. I've seen my friends collapse from exhaustion after 18-month shifts, only to get up and keep going because there's no one else to take their place. But the worst part, sir, is when we look toward Washington and don't know if anyone actually cares about what we're doing out here." Trump didn't respond right away. He simply held Jake's gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only that of a man truly listening. Then another voice broke the silence. "I'm Sergeant Emily Carter," said a woman with chestnut-brown hair neatly tucked beneath her military cap, seated across from Trump. Her voice was steady, yet heavy. "I've been here for 3 years, and that means I've missed my daughter's birthday 3 times. She exhaled softly, as if forcing herself to speak the painful truth. "Every time I call home, she asks, 'Mom, are you coming back this time?' And every time I have to say, 'No, sweetheart, Mommy is still on duty.'" Emily let out a small, almost bitter laugh, but her eyes betrayed her pain. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her mother can't come home because her job is to protect a wall? Her words carried no anger, only a quiet, unanswered question. The room grew still. Then another voice, deeper and weathered by years of service, spoke. "I'm Captain Thomas Walker." The older soldier's sun-weathered face was etched with lines of experience. "I've served for over 25 years, and I used to believe that when my service was over, there'd be something waiting for me, a place to come back to. But then I watched too many of my brothers return home to nothing, no job, no family, no support. One of my closest friends, someone I went to war with, someone who saved my life, died in a homeless shelter." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Was a great soldier, a hero, but in the end he was nothing more than a statistic on a report about homeless veterans." The weight of his words pressed down on the room, making it almost suffocating. Soldiers lowered their gazes, staring at their hands, for Walker's story wasn't just his, it was theirs too. Trump clenched his fists, then slowly rose to his feet. "No one should have to live like this," he said, his voice low but firm. "No one should be forgotten." His eyes swept across the room, meeting each soldier's gaze one by one. "I can't change what's already happened. I can't give you back the years you've lost, but I can promise you this. Starting today, I will do everything in my power to make sure that none of you ever feel abandoned again." No one clapped, no one cheered, but something shifted. A fragile hope sparked in the eyes of soldiers who had grown used to disappointment. Jake locked eyes with Trump for the first time. "Sir, are you really going to do that?" Trump nodded without hesitation. "I will, and if I don't, call me. Remind me of this promise." The room fell still for a few seconds. Then Captain Walker let out a low chuckle, warm yet laced with disbelief. "Sir, are you sure you want to open yourself up to hundreds of calls from us?" Trump smirked. "If that's what it takes to make sure you get what you deserve, then I'm ready." For the first time in months, genuine smiles appeared on the faces of these border soldiers, not because they believed everything would change overnight, but because, for the first time, they felt seen. Outside, the sun dipped behind the distant hills, setting the sky ablaze in deep shades of red. Inside that small, worn-down room, something burned even brighter. A promise had just been made, and it felt like a promise that would not be broken. The room remained heavy with silence after the soldiers' stories. Their words were not just raw truths, but wounds that had never healed. President Trump stood still, his hands tightening on the table as if trying to grasp every word that had just been spoken. There were no quick responses, no lofty promises. Then, suddenly, he turned to Captain Mark Reynolds. "Can you take me around the base?" Reynolds blinked, caught off guard. "You mean right now, sir?" Trump nodded. "Yes. I don't just want to listen, I want to see." Reynolds glanced at the security team before giving a sharp nod. He signaled to the agents, who immediately adjusted their positions around the room. Some of Trump's advisors exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke up. They all knew one thing: when Trump made up his mind, nothing could stop him. Trump stepped out of the mess hall, his stride firm against the dry, cracked earth as he walked through the camp. He saw everything. Rows of metal bunks, neatly arranged yet worn from years of use. Faded uniforms hanging under the blistering sun. Water barrels nearly empty under the relentless desert heat. A group of soldiers was inspecting a patrol vehicle, their movements slow with exhaustion. Then Reynolds stopped near a small, makeshift repair station where a handful of soldiers worked in silence, their hands covered in grease as they struggled to patch up an old armored vehicle. Reynolds turned to Trump, his voice edged with frustration. "This is what we have to work with, sir. These vehicles are over 10 years old, half of them barely run anymore. We've submitted requests for replacements, but there's no funding. So we fix what we can with whatever scraps we have left." Trump ran his hand along the dented metal, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes said enough. He stepped forward, running his hand over the scratched and dented surface of the vehicle, then turned back to Reynolds. "How long has it been since you last received new equipment?" Reynolds exhaled deeply. "Almost 2 years, sir. We've submitted requests, but bureaucracy moves too slowly. While we wait, we make do with whatever we have." Trump clenched his jaw. He had heard about government red tape before, but seeing its consequences firsthand, impacting the very soldiers protecting the border, was something else entirely. They continued walking, but then something made Trump stop. In the far corner of the outpost, a group of soldiers sat around a makeshift table. Scattered across it were letters, some crisp and new, others creased and worn from being read repeatedly. Reynolds glanced at the scene and spoke softly. "They're reading mail from home." Trump approached without a word. One young soldier, no older than 25, held a letter in his hands. His eyes were distant, lost in the words written inside. Trump lowered his voice. "Who's it from?" The soldier stiffened, startled. Slowly, he looked up. "It's from my mother, sir." His throat tightened, as if the words were hard to say. "She said she misses me, but she's not sure if I miss her because I haven't been home in 2 years. Silence fell over the group. Trump met the soldier's gaze, his expression unwavering. "Do you miss her?" The young soldier gripped the letter tightly, his voice unsteady. "Every single day." Reynolds cleared his throat. "Sir, this is the real issue. We love this country, but sometimes it feels like we have to choose between being a soldier and being a son, a father, a mother. We shouldn't have to choose." Trump stood still for a long moment, then exhaled sharply, as if something inside him had just snapped into place. "Enough," he declared, as every soldier turned to look at him, waiting. He faced Reynolds. "I can't stand here, listen to these stories and do nothing. The moment I get back to Washington, I'm fixing this." Reynolds let out a small, cynical laugh, shaking his head. "Sir, I've heard a lot of politicians say that before." Trump locked eyes with him, unwavering. "You won't have to hear me say it. You'll see me do it." Then he turned to Matthews, who had been silent until now. "I want a full report on this base's conditions tomorrow, and don't give me a breakdown of the budget. I want to know exactly what we can fix right now." For the first time that day, Matthews looked surprised, perhaps even a little impressed. "Yes, sir," Trump continued. "I also want an emergency plan to support soldiers like him." He gestured toward the young soldier still clutching his letter. "We're creating a rotation system so they can spend time with their families without compromising their mission." Reynolds folded his arms, studying Trump carefully. "And what about the ones who've already served, sir? The ones like Captain Walker, veterans with nowhere to go?" Trump didn't blink. "We're going to change that." He turned to Keller. "I want a full list of struggling veterans. I want to know where they are, what they need. We're launching a program for jobs, housing, and health care, and we're doing it now." The room fell into absolute silence. This wasn't a campaign promise. This was an order. Jake stared at Trump, caught between disbelief and hope. "Sir, you're really going to do this?" Trump nodded, his voice unwavering. "I don't promise things I can't deliver." Blackridge had never seen a moment like this. A president had come not to speak, but to listen, to see, and most importantly, to act. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something shifted. A fragile hope began to flicker in the hearts of soldiers who had long since stopped believing. Trump turned to Matthews and Keller. "Are we done here?" For the first time, Reynolds allowed himself a small smile. "Sir, I think we're only just getting started." 3 weeks after President Trump's visit, Blackridge Outpost had changed in ways no one expected. Reports that would have taken months, sometimes years, to review were now approved in days. Emergency funding was released, new patrol vehicles arrived, additional protective gear and food supplies were delivered. But the most significant change was the implementation of a new system, one that finally allowed frontline soldiers to rotate home on leave, spending time with their families without jeopardizing the mission in Washington. Trump didn't stop at improving conditions at the outpost. He personally led an initiative to expand veteran support programs, ensuring that those who had served were not forgotten after leaving the military. Job assistance, housing programs, and expanded health care services, what had once been mere statistics on a report, were now becoming real actions. Calls were made, files were opened, lives were being changed. One late afternoon at Blackridge, Sergeant Emily Carter's phone rang. She answered, and on the other end was the excited voice of her daughter. "Mommy, are you really coming home?" Emily gripped the phone tightly, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she could say something other than no. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm on my way home." In another corner of the outpost, Jake Miller was packing his gear, not because he was leaving for good, but because he had been granted leave, a privilege that once seemed impossible. As he stepped out of his tent, Captain Mark Reynolds was waiting, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You know, Miller," Reynolds said, "I've never seen a promise kept this fast." Jake let out a small laugh, the weight in his chest finally lifting. "Neither have I, sir. But it wasn't just the soldiers on duty who felt the impact of this change. Far away, amidst the bustling streets of New York City, Captain Thomas Walker, a man who had once believed he'd be forgotten like so many other veterans, opened a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inside, he read words that made his hands tremble. He had been approved for veteran housing. After more than 25 years of service, he finally had a place to call home. That evening, Walker sat on a park bench, the letter in his hands, his fingers running over the paper as if trying to convince himself it was real. He had lost too many friends. He had seen too many like him abandoned by the system. But now, for the first time in years, he knew something had changed. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump sat in the Oval Office reviewing reports from his advisors, a list of veterans who had received assistance, and a breakdown of frontline soldiers now benefiting from the new leave program, programs that had moved from mere policy proposals to real action. He sipped his coffee, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. The phone rang. "John Matthews, Secretary of Defense," came the voice. "Mr. President, I just got word from Black Ridge your reforms are making a real impact. Reynolds says that, for the first time in years, the soldiers there feel like they haven't been forgotten." Trump nodded slowly, his voice steady. "Good, but we're not stopping here. I want continued updates. If there's even the slightest delay in these policies being carried out, I want to know immediately." Matthews chuckled. "Mr. President, I think you've just set a new standard for us." Trump let out a small smile, but his eyes remained serious. "Good. Make sure we keep it that way." The call ended. Trump leaned back in his chair, gazing out at the Washington skyline. He knew that in politics some things couldn't change overnight, but today he had proven that true leadership wasn't about speeches. It was about action. A few days later, at Black Ridge Outpost, a new sign was placed at the entrance. It bore one simple phrase, "No one left behind." And every soldier at that outpost knew it wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. The stories from Black Ridge aren't just about the soldiers stationed at the border. They're about loyalty, sacrifice, and a promise finally kept. Above all, they're about action. Because action is what makes the difference. We often hear grand speeches, bold promises, and ambitious policies. But what truly matters is what happens next. Today, we witnessed a promise fulfilled. From improving the conditions of frontline soldiers to expanding veteran support programs, it all started with one unexpected visit. A visit that changed thousands of lives. But this story doesn't end here. Out there, soldiers still stand guard day and night, protecting our borders and our country. Sometimes in silence, sometimes forgotten. And veterans, men and women who once wore the uniform with pride, are still searching for a way to rebuild their lives after service. They don't need pity, they need recognition. They need to know that their sacrifices matter, and we, the ones hearing their stories, can help in the simplest way, by listening, by sharing, and by never letting them be forgotten. If you believe that those who serve this country deserve more, let your voice be heard in the comments below. What do you think about what happened at Black Ridge? What else needs to change? And if you want to hear more inspiring stories of courage, sacrifice, and real leadership, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching. Let's share this message. No one left behind, no one forgotten. See you in the next video.